Of you that are not part of Sora here, Sora Schools is an online middle and high school working to equip students with essential skills for the future. And at Sora, we recognize the profound impact of parenting on children's development. So, as educators of middle and high school students, we deeply care about the well-being of your kiddos, our students, and about setting them up for success in life, and not just success, but thriving as they enter into the real world. And we know that one of the most significant factors is that of their relationship that they build with their parents. And so you guys walk alongside our students every single day. And so to help you do your job better, Sora Talks is our online event series for parents and educators to gain insights and actionable ideas. And really just to connect with a global community of engaged educators and parents. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of guidelines for participating tonight. Obviously, we respect everyone. There will be different families and experiences in the room, and so we want to make sure that we respect everyone's differences of opinions. Post-meeting confidentiality. If discussing, which I know you will be, this meeting with others afterward, please do not mention any names. And on that point, later on, we will be having a question and answer session. And so if you have a question that you don't want your name to be tied with, which is completely legit, please DM me in the chat and just send it to me. And I will say the question and not your name, and then we'll make sure it gets answered. Okay, guys, it's time. Without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Garrett Smiley, our very own co-founder and CEO of Sora Schools. Garrett Smiley, a Forbes 30 under 30, may I add, is committed to breaking traditional educational molds and fostering a learning experience that really prepares students for the dynamic, fast-paced world of tomorrow. And he's just returning from a closed-door talk in DC yesterday with a few senators about AI's impact on education. So he is practiced and fresh for tonight's conversation. Without further ado, Garrett, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce our incredible panel.
Thank you, Rachel. Good to see everyone. This will be super fun. And the reason why this will be so fun is because I am flanked by two absolutely brilliant people. We are lucky to be joined by Julia Freeland Fisher, who's the Director of Education Research at the famous Clayton Christensen Institute. You all may have heard of it, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that studies innovation across the public and social sectors. She's also an author of an amazing book, Who You Know, Unlocking Innovations and Expanding Students' Networks, as maybe foreshadowing for a thing we might talk about today. And she's currently researching the impact of AI companions and how that is going to impact students and young people's social connectedness. Julia holds a BA from Princeton, JD from Yale. A very, very accomplished and brilliant individual. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julia. And of course, Nate Kerr. Nate Kerr is an educator and systems innovator dedicated to helping the next generation thrive in the tech-enabled world. He has 20 years of experience primarily at Teach for America and City Year, two amazing organizations. And now his work focuses on scaling learning models that prioritize human-centered research. He's currently at the Rithm project. I encourage you all to look it up, thinking about what we're going to talk about today, like every single moment now, mainly how to empower young people to maintain their agency, discernment, well-being, social emotional well-being as technology, namely AI, evolves. So thank you both so much for joining me. I am merely the humble moderator today. So in that spirit, to kick us off, this is a very broad title for a talk, and that's beautiful because we can go wherever the heck we want, and we can take Q&A from our parents. But I was hoping just right at the top, AI creates such feelings of whiplash with parents, students, really everyone today. There's opportunities, there's risk, there's, as Neil said, there's feelings of rebelliousness now coming in. So I would just love for you all to set the stage and declare a couple skills that you think are going to be of outsized importance, regardless of how this technology evolves or the impact on the economy. Just where can we take refuge that these things will be worth our time and be helpful in this future, especially for students, but really for all of us, whichever one of you want to start.
I can start, Garrett. Thanks so much for the warm introduction. Delighted to be here. So I'll say maybe just to frame the skills that I would focus on, there's kind of two paradoxes that I frankly think all of us are facing, but young people may be feeling particularly acutely. The first paradox is sort of being told that you will need to know how to use AI to be competitive in the future workforce, and using AI is cheating. And this like runs deeper than just, for those of you working in higher ed, just sort of the on the surface academic integrity concerns of like outsourcing an essay to ChatGPT. It like touches on some very deep themes around what we consider to be individual authorship and what we consider to be credible. We know from research that even adults, we experience attacks if we disclose that we used AI in a work product. But the higher tax is, in fact, if we don't disclose it and it's found out that we used it, right? So there's a double bind there. But I think that, like, I want to just center that that's one paradox that young people are facing. The other that gets talked about a lot less and relates to the skills that I spend most of my time thinking about, both as a researcher and a parent of a 4 and 6 year old, um, is around the fact that we now have 24/7 self-help machines. We can access help on demand on an almost infinite array of topics and knowledge areas and skills. And at the same time, if we over rely on AI enabled help and under rely on human help, we will be shrinking the very networks that we need to live choice filled lives, to have access to opportunities in a labor market where an estimated half of jobs come through personal connections. And that's one where, again, there's sort of the surface story of like telling young people to sort of like don't use AI for too much help. But there's also a lot of under-articulated realities of the importance of networks that we don't always tell young people about. And related to that, finally, to answer your question, Garrett, because those are the two that I think about the most, the skills associated with partnering with AI. And that's like a very broad construct, right? But being able to frame a problem in such a way that you can then use AI to iterate towards a solution is a whole skill set that like maybe we slightly teach in some schools around design thinking, but is not actually well articulated in most curricula today. And then alternatively, on the social front, the skills around help seeking, which are frankly skills and mindsets, right? It can be intimidating to ask for help, to seek out connection when you're trying to solve a problem. But that actually, I think, I'm most worried that help seeking is going to atrophy in the age of AI, and that's going to cost our young people, a whole generation, sort of the opportunity to be connected to broad and diverse networks that could open new possibilities for them.
Well, I can add in. That was beautiful, Julia. I shouldn't have waited and gone after you because that was such a good answer. And also, I'll just say like hi and thank you, Garrett, for the beautiful intro. And I should bring you to every meeting. That was like the best intro I've gotten in months. Um, I guess just to add to what Julia just said, because we enter this work from a similar lens, and that we're primarily focused on social connection and the importance of social connection in our lives and all the ways that AI is changing social connection. And so, I think just to build, I would say not just help seeking, but also help giving. Like when I think about I've got two little kids, so I'm not quite in some of your worlds with older students, but I've got a 5 and a 2 year old. When I think about sort of like what it's going to look like for them to just be like good people in a world where AI and sort of synthetic knowledge is everywhere, and it's like unclear what's real and what's fake, and um, their ability to one just like proactively reach out to people, have a sense of who their people are, um, sort of track their relationships in meaningful ways, and sort of understand the role they play in a community or in various social circles with other humans. And then things like listening, the skills that we um, utilized to support social connection, but in ways that really like offer ourselves to others. That's my like sort of where I think that tech is leading us, where research is leading us in terms of what matters, and just my like as a dad, as a person thinking about like what's important to be uh, a successful, good person who has value to others in society. And then the other skill I thought of, which is also connected in a way, is what we might call metacognition and sort of a self-awareness of not just your learning process, but something that's changed for me as someone who I think I connected to a lot of stuff folks were saying in the chat around like I feel like I'm like all of you. I use AI every day, maybe too much in some ways. Um, I also feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. It changes every day. The technology changes every day. I try to use it in different ways, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. And then I'm also, like folks said, like at various moments, extremely skeptical. I mean, this is bad. As I'm doing that, the more that I can actually focus on what's happening in my brain. And I have the advantage, which young people in the future won't, of having lived a long life before AI was present, to have some awareness of what it felt like to think about things without this sort of addition of AI entering into the process of my creation or my thinking. But I find now that the more I use AI, the more I do try to offload little important things in my thinking process that had value. And I'm like someone who's trying to preach not doing that. I care deeply about sort of not cognitive offloading across our systems, and I do it every day. Like I cognitive offload every day because I have this thing in front of me that um, is so tempting in terms of the speed and efficiency in which it can uh, do things for me and also relieve discomfort in my process, especially the start of any process. Is like when I like need to be creative or start to create something new, that doesn't feel great. Just personally, I think that's probably true for all of us. Like you have to go through like a uncomfortable process of sitting with your thoughts and really trying to push for the best idea. And it is so easy to hand that over to a chatbot now. And so I just think about young people, one, just having experiences where they're not using AI, like we all got to before this technology arrived in our lives. Um, and then, and then using it and understanding the differences and just having space to think about not just the outputs, but the actual like what it feels like to think in different situations and how that impacts the way we operate in the world.
I love that. And I really want to circle back to this notion of cognitive offloading, but I'll first go down this rabbit hole that both of you mentioned, which is this relationship development. I'm curious, how would you both respond to if I was maybe channeling a student who loves using these tools and is justifying their use of them, or maybe the most um, accelerationist proponent that we come across that say these bots, mostly the relationship friend bots, are not in fact stealing our ability to relate to other people. It's instead training for us to build those sort of relationships for teenagers in particular to practice what it means to be in relationship, especially in an era where social media and stuff are corroding that, right? So how would you respond to, is that a useful implementation of these tools, or are we missing something?
Yeah, I can go first there, Garrett. I mean, I think that is a rational sounding argument. And there is also incredibly limited empirical evidence to back up that that's what's happening. And there's a couple ways I want to like sort of frame that. I think for those of you looking at the AI market and particularly how it's impacting young people, there are built for purpose companion bots, character AI, replica as examples of this, where you can build an AI friend or lover. There are also productivity tools, which we know from benchmarks like Humane Bench and Intima, which are essentially benchmarking to understand what are the behaviors across these large language models, that productivity tools by and large have a significant bias towards companion forming behaviors rather than boundary setting behaviors. So I would argue, as someone who's looking at this space, that even productivity tools can and are showing up as companion tools. So that's first just a lay of the land of the market to understand like what are young people interfacing with. Character AI experienced exponential growth last year. For PR reasons, they're saying now that they're not allowing under 18 onto the platform. I call bullshit on that between you and me because that was very much in reaction to litigation, but we don't have real age verification in place yet. So I want you to be aware that that's sort of like the world that young people are moving in. We know from one Common Sense Media survey that over half of young people are using these tools at least monthly. Over 75% have tried them. That echoes research from the UK, from Internet Matters, similar rates. Although I don't think we know enough about usage patterns to be overly hysterical about like how common this stuff is. All of that, like I think we have to take that and then go to your question, Garrett, of like, okay, is this cross training for human connection? And my concern is that in the built for purpose bot world, there is definitive research from Julian De Freitas at HBS showing that indeed these bots are trained towards emotional manipulation to keep users chatting and have a sycophantic bent. And both of those, I would argue, are problematic to sort of align behind your thesis that this is like a capacity building tool. That being said, Rose Gungrich and Michael Graziano at Princeton have published a series of papers suggesting that companion users in the adult space who are using AI companions are actually experiencing not negative consequences on their social health. And we have examples from therapy bots showing, in fact, pro-social gains. So like, I think part of what scares me as a researcher and a parent about your question is that it depends so much on what the bot was built for and how it is being used. And I hear your argument that you mounted literally on a weekly basis in my work, and I have yet to be persuaded by any of the research that is, on the whole, the results that are being produced by these tools. In the future, could we get there with more purpose-built tools? I think absolutely.
I will say, so I was going to say, I feel that such a thing is possible. That is tough framing to say that point because Julia just said all research says not to say that she hears it every day and the research says otherwise. What I will offer, and I guess this is in agreement with you, Julia, is that we're really new to utilizing and developing this technology. And from personal experience, using AI in ways that I genuinely think were pro-social, that helped me prepare for social interactions in ways that I showed up with greater confidence and empathy than I would have. I mean, in theory, if I had the perfect coach or human to talk to in preparation for a certain conversation and interaction, that probably would have been better, but I don't have that. And in those situations, I just know from experience it's possible with really careful framing and a lot of thought put into sort of what am I trying to get out of this? How am I using AI to prepare for a social interaction? And like a pretty deep understanding of the risks, which is not the case across the board. So I agree with the broad societal risks that Julia is speaking to. I think it does take a huge amount of intentionality to say, here's how you can use AI in a way that actually supports your ability to connect socially. But I do think it's possible. I also hear that argument that it's possible quite often, or I guess most often, when talking to young people. And that is not like I don't have research on that. That is just in engaging with folks like across sort of generations and experiences, and having the privilege of getting to work with a lot of young people in this work. I hear very often the sentiment of overcoming social anxiety, overcoming social barriers, and feeling like more ready for social interaction is an enormous need for young people right now. And if we can develop tools that help people get over that hump, that feels critical. And I guess what I'll say is this technology can do that. Is it doing it? Is it being designed to do that? Probably not yet. And sort of my optimistic lens is like, okay, so let's figure out how to make it do that, right? Like, let's figure out how to put the bounds around this technology in ways that we can actually drive people towards more sort of pro-social and productive uses.
Sorry, can I say one more thing to push on that, Nate? I can't help
Yeah, of
myself.
course.
Okay, so Agree. Again, like logically, we could build tooling around this. And I work at the Clayton Christensen Institute, like a free market think tank. I'm pro technology, I'm pro innovation. And there is a real tech solutionist bent to this conversation where we have young people today whose social skills have atrophied in part because of technology. And now we're going to build a tool to fix that. And so I just want to call out that, like, disruptive innovations, including AI companions or AI tooling, like what we're talking about, thrive in parts of the market that we have neglected. And I want to push us to think about, what do young people need to feel like they have those social skills to overcome their social anxieties? And is it another tool, or is it healthier attachment in their real lives? And like, and I don't want us to just sort of forget that that's an option on the table, especially as parents, to create spaces that cultivate that and not to just look for another tool because we feel like there's something lacking that our real lives haven't been able to create for kids in recent decades.
So much to talk about. I will begrudgingly pry us away from this point of relationships, at least for a moment. So I want to circle back, as promised, to what you said, Nate, about cognitive offloading, because I think, especially in the context of Sora, this is something our parents are thinking a lot about, right? Of course, in many learning environments, it's the rules we alluded to. That's the primary thing to navigate. But at Sora, we are relatively, hopefully in a nuanced way, pro AI because we're a project-based school, right? We want students to get practice, and maybe Julie, you can bring up the point we were talking about before here as well. But we want students to be practicing building big, ambitious things using the tools they have at their disposal, using content, using all these things as tools, but really creating something big that they're proud of, navigating ambiguity. Like, these are important things to us, so AI fits in beautifully, right? That said, I am very aware that learning is hard work, right? It's necessarily hard work. There has to be friction in learning. You can't do it for someone, then they won't learn, right? You can't have the personal trainer lift gyms for you or lift weights for you at the gym. That's not how it works, right? And school's similar. So I'm just, Nate, starting with you, I'm curious, how would you advise our parents to advise, well, I guess both themselves and their students, when AI could make something for you in a place where you're trying to improve? How do you think about bootstrapping the tough, chosen friction so that you're actually improving capabilities? And then where do you leverage AI to go further than you could otherwise?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think my attitude about this for young people is uh, different than it is with sort of adult professionals, which is just do a ton of stuff, do most stuff without AI. And I think, especially, this varies by age. I don't think we've figured out the kind of perfect progression for at what age do you start considering sort of AI use as a creative tool or a productivity tool or a sort of co-producer of something that you want to put out in the world for all the reasons you were just saying, Garrett. But I think like the ability to be sort of wise and discerning in the use of that tool, I think relies on doing stuff without it. And you almost like mess up the process if too early on you're co-creating with AI. Or honestly, I mean, for adults too, like, or too often, right? Like, I think there's and this is going to be easier than said than done, as the more access we have to this technology. But that just feels like the most obvious answer to me is like, do the stuff both to develop the neurological pathways and like literally develop your brain around skills and abilities before you're then utilizing a particular tool to do the same thing, but sort of with infinite creation ability. Um, but also the point I was making earlier, which is like, don't just form those pathways, but have the emotional experience of challenge, and feel frustrated and feel like writer's block, like this thing that like nobody ever has to have anymore. Really, I mean, if you've got AI in front of you, that is just like we're just gonna get rid of that. And so just understanding like what those feelings are, what it feels like to be stuck, overwhelmed, frustrated, create something and then have it not work, like all this stuff that feels foundational. And then, I guess the second half of that is because that's in some ways that's a non-answer. Like just don't use it. I think the when you start then introducing AI as a partner in your process in some way, or sort of a critical tool to do stuff you couldn't do without it, I think we just need to be really, really explicit about why we used it the way we did and what choices we made. And I think for parents and educators, it's just that kind of debrief ability, because when we're using it by ourselves, it's very hard to hold ourselves to like, why did I put in this prompt? Or why did I choose to use it instead of not using it? But if you have a person, if you have an adult with you who can say, I saw you used AI in this case. How did you do that? And why did you make the choices you did? And if you were doing it again, would you make those same choices? And what were the trade-offs? Like, there's always trade-offs. So, what did you gain by the use? What did you lose by the use? That kind of conversation feels really critical and like a thing we need to be urgently building into our conversations, clearly in schools, but also as parents. So much happens outside of the school day. And that's, a conversation with a parent about that is just going to have a different sort of impact than a teacher saying, let's debrief.
Julie, I know you have a lot to say about that, but if I could attempt to direct you,
Sure.
could you respond um, uh, and somehow use, like an ad lib, can you somehow use the notions we were discussing before about how experiential learning fits into this?
Sure, yeah. So many thoughts. Okay. I will say one of my observations, and this is looking at, I actually think entry level work for the next 10 years is going to be a hot mess, and then things are going to like recalibrate. So depending on how old your kids are, that may be a terrifying statement, or you might feel fine. But what we basically know is that the lower rungs of the career ladder are sort of dissolving before our eyes as AI can do intern level work, entry level work, and employers are going to not sort of figure out what the new entry level work looks like for a while. In addition to which, what we're seeing in job postings is entry level positions requiring 2 to 3 years of experience, which is an oxymoron, but that's literally what employers are putting out there. All of that tells us that experiential learning, which for decades has been a pedagogical choice on the margins of most education systems, is now a market imperative, right? Now, how quickly different systems will catch up to that, obviously, you guys are sort of ahead of that curve, but um, I think it's really important to note that what you might read in sort of mainstream media right now about the labor market is there's a lot of rhetoric about skills, even in the title of this talk, right? There's a lot of rhetoric about skills, but what employers are demanding is actually experience, which is, I would argue, some of my colleagues would argue that's skills applied, and I would argue it's skills applied in a human context where you are being observed and held accountable, because there's a credentialing that happens when that occurs. And so all of that, like, I don't necessarily think that using AI is antithetical to experiential learning. And I hope that we're going to see new models emerge that actually combine the two. I think AI, first as infrastructure to scale experiential learning, is a really exciting frontier. I don't know, Garrett, if you or others on the call are familiar with Project Leo, which is a tool that spun out of a high school network called Da Vinci in Southern California. But one of the things they tackled is they had students fill out the Ikigai, which is that Japanese overlapping Venn diagram of like what you like, how you can make money, sort of a way to articulate your sense of purpose, and mapped that, aligned that to their academic competencies, and created bespoke projects for every single student. Now, an exciting part of the tool that has yet to really scale because people in education don't pay for relationships, which is like the hill I'm going to die on eventually. But the exciting part of that was that they were then connecting those projects to working professionals aligned with those students' interests to give real world feedback. And that, I can imagine that's infrastructure. You can imagine students using AI in the course of those projects, but you then want them interfacing with a professional who's giving feedback contextualized within that industry that's actually helping the student develop not just skills, but a sort of an occupational aware identity and awareness of how those skills fit into the world of work. So that's like where experiential learning, I think, is headed. And I think it would be short-sighted to say it has to all be analog. But I think you have to really keep in mind, like, what's the credentialing function? And it's not just, I'm going to put a quote from a piece by Clay Shirky that I read last week. I'm going to put it, it's too long to read out loud to you, but it'll get to the point I'm trying to make here, which is I think we can sometimes reward output over effort in the way that we assess student work, and we need to really ruthlessly flip that in the age of AI.
Yeah, at Sora, we think a lot about how do you assess the student, not just the output. So that looks everything from giving them formative feedback in the whole process, asking those questions that Nate mentioned during their process, but also opening up a dialogue during the presentation. Why'd you make those decisions that you did? Just really pay respect to the process. So I deeply resonate with that. This is something we're thinking about at Sora. How do we have students leapfrog that skills gap that's just developmentally appropriate for being a teenager and actually be able to engage in those real world authentic contexts, perhaps even in the workplace or some watered down version of that, but with people outside of their age range, ideally making real world impact and then having that marry with the portfolio of projects they're creating at Sora. So I think that beautiful blending of skills on the lower end of the spectrum, which will then, I think, elevate, and this is my grand segue, agency to maybe not the front of the stack, but certainly more important for students to be exercising and improving. So do one of you want to attempt to define agency and then either steel man or pick apart what I just said?
Julia's pointing at me, I think, so I can kick us off. Um, I think that I would define agency, and obviously it's in the context of how we're thinking about the sort of the changing nature of agency in a rapidly changing world, as the ability to, um, I guess, control. I'm probably not going to say this perfectly, but like control what's within our control in a world in which uh, we are surrounded by inputs that are sort of algorithmic in nature and dictated to us in ways that are like very outside of our own personal choice, and we actually don't like see the mechanics behind um, the system surrounding us in the ways that maybe we did 50 years ago. So I think like the we're sort of operating in environments that feel less agentic, like there is less agency possible, and our ability to within that environment really define one, just like a sort of an understanding of oneself and understanding sort of like what it means to be you and operate in the world in a unique way. But then really control the set of choices in front of you. And so I think, and Gary, you're bringing this up in sort of the context of like a rapidly changing job market. Uh, I struggle with where we sort of place agency on folks in that world versus like systemic needs. Like I think there are some big changes to the way we think about work and the process of having a meaningful life that has work within it, that sort of falls outside of the ability, like one's agency isn't going to sort of change those systems in the way that we need them to. But even operating within that system in which like less agency feels possible right now, I think it's really important for just the self-awareness to be like, where do you control or your choice in a particular environment? And how can you exercise your right to have choice, advocate for your right to have choice, understand your perspective and why it matters in a world in which there's a lot of noise, including like not even authentically human noise surrounding you. So that was not a one sentence definition, but perhaps a way that I'm thinking about agency, which is like it's harder than ever. And because of that, it really matters that we hone in on where we control our own uh, future, our destiny, the things we actually like advance towards in our education, our careers, or anywhere else.
You reminded me of I believe it was either Meta or TikTok. Meta talking about Reels or TikTok talking about their For You page. In some leaked thing I came across recently, it said you can attribute the success of this short form content directly with its limiting of user agency, right? No more asking questions, no more choosing your video, none of that. The more that we can steal agency from the user, the more profitable we are, they said explicitly. So everyone keep that in mind as we move into the future. Alrighty, Julie, do you have any comments on agency or anything in that realm?
It's a construct I struggle with because it's like very overused in education, I find. I think more in terms of like I think some categories Nate was just talking about around self-direction and self-efficacy. And the common thread of those is self. And the thing that's been coming up with me, both as you were posing this question, Garrett, and the last one about offloading, I'm like a little haunted by I'm out in the Bay Area right now and was at a gathering for the past 2 days of industry and researchers talking about AI and human connection. I was sitting next to one of the lead cognitive scientist at one of the frontier labs, I will not name which one, and asked him what his biggest concerns were. And he said, one, memory, just that we will like atrophy having memory and how that obviously impacts learning. And I would argue agency. And two, something I hadn't thought of, which is what is if you continuously use AI to extend yourself, which is sort of the rosy story that we're told, right? And certainly what employers want employees doing, at what point are you representing your ability to do things that actually AI is doing on your behalf? And if that starts to come crashing down, what happens to your sense of self, your identity? And he thinks that there's sort of a long tail of psychological impacts that we haven't even contemplated. And so that's what comes up for me when we talk about agency, that there's sort of like how much as you interact with these tools, are you maintaining a sturdy sense of self that you can back up, right? That's authentic and that you can stand behind while also probably being pulled in the direction of like representing yourself as some combination of work that you and AI are doing. So I know that's very philosophical, but it was such a haunting thing that he raised that I wanted to share it with this group.
Like you haven't even seen the diseases we're yet to invent. Yeah.
Right. No, but I
Um,
was thinking about as a parent, like, okay, how do I help my girls have a sense of like why they're doing what they're doing so that even if it's in partnership with AI, there's a real sense of ownership behind it. And I think if you lose that why you're doing what you're doing, um, the sort of a lot of sense of self can dissolve really quickly.
I think that's also why it's so important to first have students practice empathy with problems. What I mean by that is it is who am I caring about? What problems am I caring about? Because it's impacting who am I caring about? And just always recentering back to the why, not the how or the what, because the more you get married to the particular tool or what you're able to accomplish with it, I think it's easier for that to manifest versus I love these people, this community, these problems, blah, blah, blah. That will never go away, right? Alrighty, we're about to move into Q&A. So I will give this as, who knows what direction that's going to go in. Our parents are very creative. So Julia and Nate, do you have any big topic that you're thinking about a lot that we have not covered that you'd love to just do a few sentences? Maybe you want to scare us again, Julia. Any other short horror stories you have prepared for us?
No, I will spare you any more doomer content until the Q&A.
We do actually have some questions already in the chat, Garrett. So would you like me to open up that doorway
Is
and
there anything you want to make sure we
Nate,
mention, Nate,
sorry.
before we open those floodgates?
I guess just one, this is sort of like a recent takeaway from at the Rhythm Project. We've done sort of like some more recent research talking to young people about their AI use. Most of what came out has come out of this sort of recent round of asking young people about their AI use aligns to a bunch of other research that's happening right now. So stuff that Julia said around kind of rates of use, they're like 75-ish% of young people are starting to like, within the last month regularly use AI. There's still a lot of variance in how young people are using AI. But one thing that stood out to me within that research is just how many young people said that adults, and particularly their parents, are not talking to them about it. So I think that'll probably come up in that form in the questions. I think probably I think probably Sora parents are different than a general population in that you opted into this extremely sort of innovative tech-enabled model of learning, and they're probably thinking about this in a more open and forward-looking way than like your average parent or sort of how young people might perceive their parents in a sort of general study. Um, but since it hadn't come up, it really stood out to me. And I think one thing that keeps coming up is how much young people are saying adults are not engaging with us at all on this. And it's like central. This is true of social media too. It has been true of social media. It's now true of AI. Like this is our entire world. Our sort of digital reality is so central to what we spend huge amounts of our time doing. And literally no one is bringing it up. There's no place for it in the sort of academic school day. Our parents are intimidated by it, and so they're not bringing it up either. Um, so I don't, that's like my kind of random other thought that I just think matters for this group is like, it's really important, even if you are one of the people who is like anti-AI or feels overwhelmed, like how could I ever catch up on this or don't understand it or have never used it? Just the importance of like, it is very likely that your child is using or going to use AI soon. And just creating spaces to be sort of open and confused together with young people and not feel like we have to know better because it's technology that we're also figuring out at the same time. So that's my one addition, I guess, before we get into other questions. And it looks like maybe I prompted another thing that Julia wants to add first, but I don't know if that's true, Julia.
I think we should jump to questions. So I see Marcelo's questions very related to what Nate just said, but I'll defer to you, Rachel. You've been keeping a closer eye on.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I was going to say, Marcelo, would you like us, Marcelo, to read it out, or would you like just a voiceover? Either way is great.
You can go ahead and read it out. It's fine by me.
Okay, my son, 14-year-old, is very adverse to AI. He's never been to any school. He is a self-driven learner. When he brings me questions that I don't know the answer to, I use AI to help me out while he prefers to use a traditional Google search. Do any of you have similar experiences with your kids? Should I just let him choose not to use AI? He doesn't trust AI at all. Maybe he's protecting himself from a real danger, but maybe he's being a bit irrational and will end up missing out. By the way, he believes that if you use generative AI to create things, you are cheating.
Who wants it?
Okay, I can say a few words. I mean, I've thought a lot about this. I don't have parenting advice for you myself, so I'm going to give a researchy answer. Although I do think it's like I wonder if there's a chance to like kind of help create a project around this tension, right? Like make this a teachable moment where it's like let's dig into like what's underneath that feeling that using AI is cheating. And I've been looking at the research on this again because I'm really interested in what our relationship to AI is telling about us about our relationship to health. And there's surveys showing college students when they're electing to not use AI, the reason behind it is I feel like I should do it myself. And there's a virtue to that, right? We should hold on to that. That's beautiful. And that is also echoing a culture of rugged individualism that is actually not a great cultural value to cling to, right? All of the sort of cult of the individual sort of entrepreneur success stories that we lionize, right? The TED Talk, the Substack, there are all sorts of invisible helping hands behind individual success. And despite everything I've said about my misgivings, AI is another helping hand. And so, like, giving your son the chance to sort of unpack his relationship to the concept of help and then allowing AI to sort of be a use case and like when is that acceptable or not might be an interesting way to not coerce use of it, but to like go deeper into this knee-jerk reaction that he's having, which by the way is very rational and prudent in a culture where we don't admit how much help leads to individual success.
Thank you so much.
If I can just add one thought, because it's such a good, interesting question. I think, one, just aligned to some of the thinking I've shared, like I I don't think a 14-year-old needs to be using AI that much. So that's my initial reaction is like, um, for all of the challenge and complexity of the things you need to learn how to do for most of your youth, using AI is not that hard, like compared to like all the things he's doing and learning out without using it. So I think that I don't think someone can personally like succeed in most jobs once they enter a job. Um, I don't think there's a future in which you can just opt out of using AI. I think to keep up with baseline productivity, pace of things, like you're going to need to be able to use the technology that's there. But you could catch up on that like the summer before you start that job. So just I think it's important that we don't like lead with fear around technology and that like we have to introduce it at some certain point. And then my one other thought is that like because the point on thinking AI is cheating is so interesting. Like I think what really matters there is just that that's his personal sort of ethical stance about it and not something that's been he feels like has been imposed on him by other people. Because that feels bad to me if it's like, oh, I've heard it's cheating and I feel worried about getting in trouble. Like that's not a productive or like an honest way to think about the technology. But if it's that's as a person, that is his belief about this technology. Like that's beautiful, and that's like ripe for conversation. And so that was my only
This
other
this
thought.
actually dovetails very nicely with Alex's question. Uh, Particularly read. Curious how all the talk about AI and its environmental impact. Is this true? How can we be mindful about this and the balance of the amazing benefits of AI? I think that's very funny to combine that to what you're saying, Marcelo, as well. It almost feels like students today have this like the last generation of the internet's like the noble savage. Everyone's like, wow, it is so beautiful. What before the internet had bad incentives to like capture our attention. Google would never. Google also has really, really terrible incentives at play. And so I think students today, I forget who said this earlier, but or maybe it was Niels, there's like this cultural us versus them happening with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Like this is taking our jobs and therefore we hate it and it's cheating and it's ruining the environment. And these things we need to be very thoughtful about, but a lot of them are bad reasons. So I would lean a lot more into what Nate and Julie are saying. How can we have dialogue about this? Don't paint it as a tribal thing and ensure that the reasoning that we have is born of these ethical considerations, not misinformation and not the cultural pressure that we're feeling. Because the stakes are quite severe. This is also just individually, like Nate was saying, this is going to be, is frankly just going to change our career prospects based on our relationship with this.
Let's take a look at the chat. Following up from Marcelo's question, we had Dan and Clint Walker. Danny, excuse me. I have a question. Generative AI use in creative endeavors. AI currently does not create anything. It scraps from existing sources online, directly using artists' work in the creation of new AI art, be it visual art, music, etc. What are your thoughts on working artists seeing their work stolen because it is theft to create new art that AI uses then sells? I have personally spoken to fellow artists who have had to waste hours of their work chasing down AI prompters who have used their work to benefit financially or engage legal counsel to fight this damage to their livelihoods. The artists whose work was stolen are usually not given any options to opt out of their work being used, nor consulted on permission compensation. This is hugely problematic for anyone creating any kind of original human-made art in the creative fields. Thank you for that question. Who would like to take that?
I can say a really quick thought because I don't have a I agree with everything in that question in terms of like a place of concern. The only thing I'll add is like my one optimistic hope is that we are in a moment of transition in which we're wowed by the ability of a new technology. And I think I believe this. I sincerely hope that we're going to quickly land back in a place in which we understand how to value human creativity and outputs and actually tell the difference or choose to honor the difference between things that are AI created and human created. And in some ways, like human creative endeavors become more valuable in an environment in which they can be sort of quickly replicated without any like new, I don't know, you can just, there's no soul behind an AI output in the same way as when you look at a beautiful thing that a human created. And so I think we're going to get there kind of quickly. I think there is enough backlash already around just like the idea of AI slop or like this kind of like constant influx of um, these sort of synthetic products that were created by putting together a bunch of the kind of leading thing, whatever the thing is you asked for. Um, that's not exactly an answer. It's just my hope is that we as humans care about and are touched by creativity, and that's gonna persevere through this technology.
Yeah, I would add a sort of humorless think tank note, which is just regulation lags innovation, and we need completely new legal structures to grapple with this that just don't exist. So if you look at some of the settlements around even like book copyright, it's very blunt how it's being handled. I do think there's creative legal scholars thinking about this, but I think it's going to be take time. So share all of your concerns.
Maybe you have time for one or two more questions. Don't be shy.
Let's
You can
open up the
also unmute.
mic. Yeah, let's open up the mic, shall we? People, do not be afraid to use your voices, not just the chat. Please do. I saw in the chat there's a few statements. If we want to repeat any of those, if you see your statements in the chat that has not been used, please do speak them out. Do not be shy, as Gary.
I'll go. I'll ask a question. So, as a parent, my daughter's 12 years old. I'm 48 years old. So I remember when the internet started, right? And we started to see www dot whatever everywhere. And I remember sitting in a college course and I said, "Holy crap, everybody is going to be so smart." And I think what we see now is that's not necessarily the case. And my concern is how social media was almost weaponized against people, and in addition, children. So if I'm going to talk to my daughter about AI use and whether, it fits in the framework of her normal day-to-day use and then how it fits into her learning model, how do I prepare her for the potential weaponization of the moneyed forces to use this against her?
Great question. So I got to use moderator privilege and say, what do the experts think?
I was going to turn that to Garrett and to you. I mean, I think I think maybe my response to Marcelo's question, I'm kind of going to echo that here of like, rather than like, what what framework do you give to her? How do you co-create an understanding of this moment with her through conversation, right? And that Nate was alluding to that was sort of the idea of intergenerational dialogue. But I am, I'll say like I'm very worried about the direction the consumer market is headed and social media, like part of part of the dysfunction of social media was that it felt like it was free, but we were giving away our data, right? And this is yet another, even though the Frontier Labs have a different business model from social media. It's not engagement at all costs. They actually lose money on engagement. So that like the incentives aren't quite the same. It's still the quid pro quo is give me your data, I'll give you the tooling. And so just I guess I would say just talking about that, which then doesn't have to lead to like a deprivation mindset of like I fully don't use this, but it's not a satisfying answer, Peter. It kind of your question made my heart hurt a little.
So I'd love to, is Blue still there? Want to ask your question? Maybe. Or type it. Typing's okay too.
Clint, if you're online still, or Danny, we'd love to hear from Blue. Speaking of intergenerational conversation, what a great way to end this conversation. Blue, when you're ready, either type
Or
in
not, no
here.
pressure.
It says in the chat she's ready to ask, so I will wait on that for a few moments. Nils is saying, as a Sora parent, I think this is why I'm so grateful for a school like Sora that is leaning into this tension and preparing our kids for a much different future than we know today.
It's going to be weird. The only way through it is to talk about it, Niels. No one has the answers yet. Alrighty. I see them unmuting, but maybe mic isn't working. I'm not sure. Feel free to pop it in chat, or I know we're just at time.
You know what? I'm going to do this. Hey, Blue, I know we are in contact every day, so any question that you have for Nate or Julia or Garrett, I will for sure send in an email because your voice matters, you matter.
Hi. Are you able to hear us? Oh, yay!
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
yes.
Sorry, we were having issues with the mic. Blue is frantically chatting or typing as fast as they possibly can. So I would just give them half a moment to finish their thoughts, and they'll absolutely share those. Thank you so much. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize, Danny. This is awesome. Okay, thank you for your time. Blue, we understand you are putting it into the chat. While we are just waiting for them to pop it in, I just want to thank you all for coming, and Julia and Nate especially. What an incredible beginning of an exquisite conversation that I really would love to continue with you guys and our parents at another time. Garrett, as always, it's such a pleasure to have you in the room with our parents, and really being that foundation of these kinds of questions and us being curious in this realm. So let's turn to the chat because I see something just popped up and I'm hoping, yes. Okay. Hi, Blue here. I'm going to rant a bit because I have a deep hatred for the existence of AI. It's got a lot of issues to both the environment and people. It's caused damage to the environment through carbon emissions and other things. People living near these data centers do not have clean water to drink. AI like ChatGPT has made people stupid. They cannot think for themselves. It's rotting their brains. I've made a document covering as much as I can and plan to make a second cut to cover much more. And they have linked, it in our meeting chat for us to take a look at. Thank you, Blue. Much appreciate your thoughts and input here.
I will say it's similar. I know this wasn't exactly a question, but this is always the problem when these sort of transformational forces are at play. Many different things are mentioned in the same breath, with one being dramatically more consequential than the other. And I think often decent points that are technically true are weaponized against us to take up airspace when other things, and I'll name the psychological impacts and perhaps it making us dumb, to I believe the word you use, is potentially much, much, much more catastrophic, right? So I would just encourage us always. There are so many reasons to like and dislike, and different people have incentives for having us talk about certain things and not other things, right? So this feels like a common theme for all of us of we're gonna have to design new ethical frameworks around what AI use means. So let's get out in front of that conversation and be as truth-seeking as possible. So it's a great point.
I know we're at time. I just want to say quickly, because I appreciate what Blue added and this document. there's going to be a experience for people that hold these beliefs in which it feels very isolating to think this way, because there are just a lot of forces that sort of speak to the centrality, sort of inevitability of AI. And so just want to appreciate this being shared and the perspective and say that there is, even though it's not always like the central voice or just, it's not the voice that always like holds power or is allowed to speak first, there is a huge community of people that are raising similar concerns, feel this way, and like it's just so incredibly critical that documents like this exist. So just saying that to affirm the like sharing of it to close us out and your perspective, Blue, and please keep sharing it moving forward.
That's a
Right.
beautiful way to end. Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Blue. I look forward to reading this right after. It's comprehensive.
Wonderful. I want to be honoring of everyone's time here on all coasts and all over the world that has joined us tonight. Garrett, Nate, and Julia, this has been an incredible evening.